Don't feel your question isn't a good one.
Yeah. It's always a good one. Yeah.
Hi, so I'm Rachel. I'm a student at NUS, about to graduate. What I'm kind of curious about is, would it be possible for a female to get over the imposter syndrome with, knowing that, guessing that there might be some unconscious bias among her male bosses?
I think unconscious bias is a fact. But I don't think it has to lead to this imposter syndrome. I think it's just a fact of life. When I ran for office, it was really interesting. There was a time when there were 7 of us who were running, who were women out of a council of 9. And I got questions like, well, don't you think there are too many women if you all get elected? I thought, would you ever ask a man this? And in fact, we got elected, and there were 7 out of 9 on the City Council of Seattle. And it was quite a statement, right? So I think you just take for granted that there is going to be this bias. But I think that's where you look at the facts. Have the data, own your success. I think it maybe is a greater hurdle, again, when you have that kind of unconscious bias. But I think you just have to acknowledge, based on the statistics and data that I shared with you in the first few slides, there is bias. There's a sense that women have to be extra, extra good, work extra, extra hard. And sometimes we internalize that and sometimes are our own worst enemy. So.
Yes.
Hi, my name's Vicky Benz, and I'm the president of Women in Mining and Resources in Singapore and an executive with BHP Billiton, the world's biggest mining company. So lovely to be here. I'm also a mining engineer, one of 400 people that actually graduated from mining engineering many years ago. So my question here is, what role do the male line managers play in actually helping the women throughout our organisation get over the imposter syndrome? Because often that's where unconscious bias originates from. And what can the male and female line managers actually do to help their population move on?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, because I think oftentimes men continue to be the hiring managers. And I think men have an opportunity to spot talent, to promote talent, to showcase women, especially in your industry where I suspect women engineers are a small percentage. But I think also the obligation, and this is not very easy, is to help men understand that they have a bias and to be specific, to feed it back, to use concrete examples. And I think you sort of hope that the male manager has the company the company's interest at stake. And I think that's one of the most insidious things about the unconscious bias is men and women have this bias, right? I mean, I think the example of the resumes is a case in point. So I think being able to present the business case, present the data, and I think advocacy is really important. Especially if there are other women, if there are other mentors involved to basically champion a woman, to fill a slot, to, I think also there's an opportunity to recommend other women. One of the most common excuses is I would hire a woman or I'd promote, but I just can't find any, right? Mm. And so it's to actually help bring talent to the fore. And I think that's where you can also think about where your highest leverage points are. If there's a stated commitment for diversity, for example, for women, we did this at the Gates Foundation, actually. We said, I don't want to interview unless there's a pool that includes women. So don't actually bring me a pool. And that puts a little bit more pressure on the recruiters, but it's kind of an example of upstream to say, you've got to have women in the pool to get considered. Working way backstream, upstream, I think, looking at the College of Mining, seeing, are there interns that can be brought in, women interns into the company, where you can actually showcase young talent, and they may have an opportunity to get hired into an entry-level position. So thinking about all the different leverage points are kind of some possible ways to make sure that women continue to get considered and hired and promoted in the industry.
Young lady here.
Hi, I'm Purva and I'm from American Express. My question is actually sort of about leadership as well. So how do you think the imposter syndrome actually impacts leadership in women? And like you said, it isn't so much of a female century yet. So what do you think we can do to bridge that gap? If not so much as to make it a female century, then at least to reach parity.
So I
Actually,
think,
Martha, I wondered if I could tag
Sure.
a question to both those questions. To what extent do you think that organizations or institutions or even governments should be compelled to make this happen, either through more direct affirmative action policies or quotas? I mean, we've got this controversial issue over quotas out there, right? So it's to, one thing is to work that into the organization, another one is actually to compel institutions to actually make it happen, right?
I got asked this question earlier, and to be honest, I go back and forth. I think one of the things we actually did at the Gates Foundation, because we didn't see enough women in leadership, is to establish some targets. It was kind of a soft quota, but to say, as an executive team, we commit to seeing this kind of diversity, and we're going to hold ourselves to it. And one of the ways that we did that is actually to bring data on a regular basis in front of the leadership team, to track the progress, to actually make it an accountability measure for our performance reviews, to say, what kind of diversity am I going to have? And oftentimes the reason that it doesn't happen is there's lip service and it's never mentioned again. But if it's actually integrated into performance measures, if it's actually something that the executive leaders pay attention to and actually reward great managers who are showing diversity, you begin to see a change in that. But I also think, similar to the question just a moment ago about building the pipeline of talent, I'm not quite ready to go for quotas, but I also look at some of the countries, Germany, who are saying we're going to require a minimum % of women on corporate boards. And I'm really interested to see what the experience is. It may be that we may need to go there, given the continued gap. I also, think about the implications for a country like Singapore or South Korea or Japan. You see a low growth rate, and that has tremendous long-term economic implications for the future of the country. You're excluding a significant part of the workforce that is absolutely essential to the long-term growth. And it means there are changes in policy, whether it's paid childcare. I think one of the most vexing challenges for the private sector is how you accommodate women with families to continue on their career track. Today, I think for the most part, women have to choose. I have a family, I leave work, there's no way I can get back on that career track. Well, think about all the talent that we are losing. So I think we're lacking the policies and the systems and the infrastructure to accommodate a fact of life, that women in childbearing years leave to get a family. How can we accommodate what is kind of a natural part of evolution and growth? And I don't think either the government sector or the private sector has caught up yet. I think getting back to the leadership question, I think for me, I was often put in positions of leadership before I thought I was ready. And a lot of that was by my mentors or my bosses who kind of saw something in me. And I was scared to death. I mean, my first reaction was, I'm not prepared to do this. And it's a fallacy. I mean, no one is prepared on day one of a job to know everything and to do the job. And I think for the longest time when I joined the Gates Foundation, I thought, I should have this all figured out on day one, which was nuts, right? And so I think giving yourself permission to grow and evolve is kind of a natural part of being a leader. I think it's also to be courageous enough to feel vulnerable. I thought for a long time as a leader and as a manager, I had to be perfect. I had to have all the answers. I couldn't show any vulnerability because it would erode my authority, that my direct reports wouldn't have confidence in me. Well, what I found was exactly the opposite. And my boss, Jeff Rakes, taught me a lot about what it meant to be vulnerable. And we would do 360s. And so at one point, I decided I was going to share my 360s with my direct reports and said, you know, there are some persistent themes for me that I've got to work on, and I need your help. Because on some of these, I don't know that I'm doing it. And so negotiating with them to say, I need your help to grow. This is an area I really want to grow in. You know, what it showed, and I was really surprised, so many of my direct reports said, wow, you know, I can't believe that you were willing to be vulnerable and that you're human. And it sort of gave permission to them to say, I'm not perfect. I need your help in growing. And it's actually very empowering. So I think it's kind of dispelling, again, this notion of what a perfect leader is, and feeling that I have to be perfect and anything less than that kind of erodes my confidence. But also be willing to step up and take risks, and really put yourself out of your comfort zone, knowing that you might fail.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Tara Kimbrell Cole. I'm the president and board chair of the Society for Organizational Learning in Singapore, and I had my own company in organizational learning, leadership development, systems thinking. I'm particularly concerned about the numbers regarding women who become leaders in organizations, I'm talking about the multinational organizations, and who don't raise their hands for the very top roles. This, to me, is a very serious problem. We're not going to be represented in governments or have the impact on the world we have if our leading women are not reaching for the top roles. And I'm curious to understand what you think is operating in that. And yeah, thank you.
Well, it was interesting. At lunch, I was talking to Yulene Go, and you know, she was sharing with me a time in her life when she was with senior level executives, and there was an open position, and a man said, you know, I'm going to go for that position. It was outside of his area of expertise, and she said, well, it's kind of outside your area of expertise. He goes, yeah, but I'm going to get the job and I'll figure it out later. Now, most women would say, well, I'm not qualified. It's outside my area of expertise, right? And so I think part of it is this shift in mindset, saying, you know, I can figure it out, right? I am willing to take the risk, and I'm willing to step up and ask for the job and present my qualifications. So a lot of it, I think, is for us to be willing to be courageous enough to put ourselves out there, which I think many women are reticent to do. So I think that's one mindset change.
The conundrum is that women, I'm talking about women who are already in leadership positions. They've already raised their hands. So what is it about that last piece of command that is still
You know, I
stumbling?
think there's still a stereotyped image of what a Fortune 500 or Global 500 CEO should look like. And I think the women who are in those positions are showing that they're not necessarily male. I think Mary Barra of General Motors, you know, came into an extraordinarily difficult position, and I think has demonstrated that, you know, she's a very capable leader. You know, when I was growing up, there were no role models. You know, there weren't women senators, there weren't women CEOs, there weren't women presidents of universities. And so I actually didn't have a vision of what was possible. And I think part of that is at play. When you don't see women in these positions of leadership, it reinforces that, well, you don't see many around. So I think, you know, gradually promoting women. I think the other kind of avenue is a leverage point is boards of directors. Now, it's kind of an unvirtuous cycle right now because there are so few women on boards. But shareholders, I think there's more public pressure to get women on boards of directors. Those boards of directors are critical because they're the ones who hire the CEOs. And women who get on boards of directors, and those of you who are on boards, get on the nominating committee. That's how other women are asked to join the boards. And oftentimes, if men are on those nominating committees, they'll say, well, I don't know any women. Well, they probably don't. Their circles are pretty small, and so it perpetuates that cycle. So I think those are kind of opportunities for potential leverage points to change the system. Not as fast as we would like, but I think those are potentially some very powerful levers that we could exercise.
Right. Thank you.
And then I'll come here. You first, and then we'll get to... You can just wait at the mic if you want.
Hello, my name's Anne Matheson. I know nothing about business at all. I'm a psychotherapist. But so what I'm interested about, what I've noticed here as a psychotherapist, I've worked here for 22 years now. What I've noticed here is I do a lot of work with women. And the inner critic that you talked about with the imposter is more of an internal state of affairs. And also here in Asia, the lack of capacity to be assertive and how assertion is seen as not feminine. So there's a lot of, in my understanding in leadership, there's a lot of need for deeper work. So do you know where that might be happening? Because I feel like if the talk is on the surface, it doesn't change women. It doesn't change the situation.
Well, I would defer to your expertise as a psychotherapist, because I think you're right, that self-talk is deeply buried, right? And I think for, as an Asian American also, the kind of mores, right? And what I had to learn is I actually had to learn new language for myself. And I literally rehearsed that with this circle of women who was my support group. Mm-hmm. It felt so foreign. I mean, I literally wrote out my speech. And I think the reality is that you have to learn how to advocate for yourself and assert yourself. And so it may mean and feel like you're actually performing because it's so foreign to you. But in fact, that is a requirement. So learning how to be assertive, learning how to use humor, like my friend Vivian, who kind of was very bold in asserting her raise. And I think for the Asian culture also, it runs against everything that I was raised to do. Yeah. Good girls aren't loud. They don't brag about themselves. And I'm not talking about arrogance or rashness. But I think we have to learn how to kind of advocate for ourselves, how to kind of lay out the facts. Be objective about listing the accomplishments, the contributions, the significant impact that we've had, and making a case for ourselves. I guess one tactic that I use sometimes when it's really difficult to do it for myself is I imagine I'm doing it for somebody else, right? And I would write this speech as if I were writing it for my best friend, when in fact I'm writing it for myself. Because I think we're so used to sort of discounting self and promoting self. So I think it really requires new language, new skills, and like anything, you have to practice at it. And it's even asking questions, right? I mean, everybody says, I'm not going to look stupid and ask a question, right? What if I sound stupid? And what if the answer is so obvious? Well, what I found is that oftentimes, if I asked a question, people would say, well, I had the same question, but I didn't really want to ask, right? And sort of letting go of this notion that, you're willing to look less than perfect. So I guess those are just some suggestions, but it's really, I think, a decision that you're going to put yourself out of your comfort zone and break the habits that, again, are so unconscious at some levels.
And as you say, it's really learning to have the capacity to be vulnerable and still stand solid.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Those two things. Yeah.
Yes, and I think also when I was starting in banking, it was a very male-dominated world, right? And I was joking the other day, I looked at a picture of myself with a silly little business suit with a stupid, goofy little tie. It was kind of the dress for success model. We all looked like, like we were kind of men. And we looked absolutely ridiculous, right? But it was kind of the code for business dress with a very narrow parameter to be taken seriously, right? So you kind of play the game. My boss was a woman. She was a terrific mentor and advocate. And her personality was pretty harsh, right? But I think many women feel that they have to give up who they are as women to be successful. And I will tell you that's not the case. You know, I also get asked sometimes about, well, what about the queen bee syndrome, right? Early in my career, I just thought every senior woman was an advocate for other women. Well, that's ridiculous. You know, of course there are women who act like men. There are, you know, women who are queen bee, and that's just a fact of life, right? So I think you have to really be rooted in kind of who you are and stand firm. I mean, you're there for a reason. You've achieved success and accomplishments for a reason. And don't feel you have to give up being a woman to continue to be successful.
Okay. Can I take the question?
So I'm finding my own imposter syndrome to say, here's a psychotherapist, she knows so much more about this than I do. She should be talking about this, okay?
Hi, my name is Alvina. I'm an optimizer with ExxonMobil. I have a personal question. So you spoke about taking risk, and really the risk about taking risk is that you will fail at some point in time. And I guess the hardest thing for people with imposter syndromes to do is to bounce back from failure. Mm-hmm. So do you have any advice on how do you do that? Or maybe you can share an example of when you have once failed and how do you bounce back and tell yourself that it's okay?
Yeah, it's hard, okay. When I first became CAO, I inherited a project that was kind of a disaster. It was our third attempt to implement an enterprise-wide grant information system, which, if you're a foundation, is actually very important to have, okay? And before I became CAO, I thought, oh, I'm so glad I don't have any to do this project because it is a disaster. And so when I learned that I had to take it over, I was, you know, really nervous. I made some mistakes. One of the mistakes that I did was let the pressure get to me. And instead of saying, okay, time out, I need to assess the situation. Okay, I let myself get run over by the overspending. We were past timeline. It was our third attempt. Our systems were breaking. And I made some mistakes in terms of appointing the wrong people who didn't really have the right skills. And that was really painful because we had to go through another rev. We eventually launched the system, but I considered it a failure. Now, from a technology perspective, it never crashed. It did what we designed it to do. But it was a clunky, user-hostile system. You know, there's about 10 mistakes that you can make in an enterprise-wide system. We made like 8.5 of them. And it was really painful because it was kind of under me. And so what I decided to do is make some good out of this. So I commissioned a consultant to come in and to do a no-holds-barred postmortem. And I said, there are no sacred cows. Okay, go after me. I mean, be honest, be objective, because I want this to be a learning for the organization, because we can't repeat this. It was, you know, hugely expensive. It took its toll on people. And he did. You know, he interviewed a number of people, and the findings were pretty damning on kind of a project level, on a project management level, and on a culture level. So what I decided I needed to do is to share it with with the executive team. But what I wanted to do is I wanted to get their hearts and their heads. You know, Gates Foundation is very intellectual, right? And I knew that we had to change some things, that I had to change hearts and minds. So I took a risk on presenting it in a very unconventional way. I mean, typically it would be a PowerPoint, it would be a report, findings, blah, 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 blah. And I decided I would use a fishbowl technique. And so I asked the most courageous people who were involved in this project, who were part of the kind of interview process, who would be willing to speak truth to power to the executive team. And I had a group of very respected, high-level people. And then I coached my executive team, our executive team, to say, okay, the first 20 minutes, these people are going to sit in the middle, and you can't say a thing. The only thing we have to do is listen. Second 20 minutes, we can ask questions, and the last, it can be kind of an exchange. And some of the leaders who came to speak to us got very emotional, broke down about the role that we played as executives in this failure. We owned part of this failure. And up until this time, I think everybody had said, well, it's Martha's thing, not my thing. Well, for an enterprise-wide system, you have to have enterprise-wide support and engagement, which we really didn't have. And it was pretty successful. You know, after we dismissed these people, there was silence. And my colleagues said, you know, wow. And I think there was a realization that the next time we did an enterprise-wide system as a team, we better really link arms and have each other's backs, not just in rhetoric. So for me, it was very painful to be kind of branded with this, what I considered a failure. But sort of thinking about, okay, what good comes from this? What lessons can we learn and can I learn? And so for both on a personal level and an organizational level, it was really thinking about, you know, what good comes out of it. And, you know, I joked with my boss and said, you know, are you going to fire me over this? And he said, you know, don't be ridiculous, Martha. But that was one of my fears, right, because I was accountable. But, you know, I had a great boss, and he was constantly saying, what do we learn from it? How do we get this better next time?
Maybe we can take one or two more questions before, or maybe three more questions, because there's one lady at the back. So maybe what I'll do is I'll take the three questions all together, and then you come in to answer. So the lady at the back, yourself. And
Hi, Martha. Thank you for your presentation. I'm Noreen. I am an MPM student, and I am a director for Human Resources of the Philippine Civil Service Commission. I'm tempted to concede for a second that there might be no distinction between women who are coming from Asia and those who are coming from the West. For instance, I know that Margaret Thatcher, who was viewed as an Iron Lady, hired a voice coach so that she will improve her executive presence. Women from Asia, especially from my organization in the Philippines, are also besieged with some stereotypes. My organization is HR, and most of our women directors are, most of our directors or officials are women, because again, HR is considered a soft skill and therefore for women. So I'd like to find out if there is a distinction in the way, well, executives or men view women from Asia versus women who are from the West. Okay. That's my question. Okay. Thank you.
so could I take the second question on this side? Do you have a question? Yeah. No, I'll just take all three questions because we're running out of time, and then Martha will come in with the final words.
Okay. I'm Robin Dietrich from BP, and I was listening to I'm a reasonably confident winner. I didn't score highly on the imposter scale, but as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking about my 8-year-old daughter who totally exhibits some of the traits. And so something I was thinking about was, well, when we get to the workplace and we miss out on that leadership job, or we forget to negotiate our first salary, or we're worried about unconscious bias, actually, should we be starting a whole lot earlier? And now I'm worried that I'm breeding the next generation of imposters. Please help me.
Great. Do you have a question here? And did you have a question? Yeah, okay, so we'll take the final two, okay?
Hi, Komal Sahu. I'm an angel investor here in Singapore. My question was, you mentioned that a lot of highly successful men, highly intelligent men, also suffer from an imposter syndrome. What do they do differently? Which psychological place do they go to get over the imposter syndrome such that it doesn't impede their progress?
Okay, final question.
Hi, my name is Christina, also from SVP from BHP Billiton. My question is that we recognise there's still a fair way to go towards the female century, but by when can we say that our generation, we've achieved our target? Is 50-50 the target that we're working towards? Thank you.
Great. Okay. Asian women versus Western women. I think there is a stereotype that continues around Asian women in terms of assertiveness, in terms of effectiveness. When I was running for office, I got a lot of questions about being an Asian woman. There was already another Asian woman. It was like, aren't there enough of you? As if there was a quota, right? Which was really interesting. Fortunately, the voters were intelligent enough to not do that. I think Asian men and Asian women are often viewed as lacking in leadership skills, and often it's because it's a lack of assertiveness. And leadership comes in lots of different shapes and forms. There's kind of a Western model of assertiveness for leadership. Asian women often don't fit into that because they oftentimes are quieter, more acquiescent, less assertive. So yes, I do think that bias still continues. And I think thinking about, again, awareness of the bias and how to overcome it. Oftentimes I've been the only at a table, as many of you have been, the only woman, the only Asian woman. And I think on the one hand, there's an opportunity and obligation to kind of speak up and assert yourself. The danger is that you take on feeling a need to speak for all women or all Asians, which of course is ridiculous. But I think being at the table gives you a special opportunity to give voice. And I think, we should take advantage of that. So I do think starting young, is a great idea. I mean, it starts at a very young age. There have been some studies that kind of trace it back to those early years. So, teaching those girls how to negotiate with boys or brothers or other girls, I think it starts there. I think it was really interesting for me to read it and prepare for this speech and read about the Sheryl Sandbergs and the Maya Angelou's and the Jodie Fosters. I think many of the women have kind of adopted I am going to power through it. I may feel like I'm not worthy, but I am going to actually act like I am. I'm going to show up. And, for me, a lot of my self-talk has been, I can do this. I can, literally, that's the tape I have to play to say, I can do this. I can learn. And so I think it's recognizing that I feel I'm incompetent, but I'm there because other people feel I'm competent. So again, I think there's taking stock of what I'm able to do, the successes that I've had, and kind of owning those and letting that drown out this kind of second guessing. But a lot of it is just literally powering through it and saying, I don't know how I'm going to do it, but I'm going to figure it out, and changing that self-talk and that self-tape. And that's what I found in, just reading a lot of these accounts from these imposter syndromes. I think the president of Harvey Mudd College kind of captured. There are kind of two voices, like I don't really deserve to be here, but yes, I do. I've earned this place, and I own it. So I think it's letting that voice drown out the other ones. And that was, fairly typical of a lot of the profiles of the women that I read who were highly, highly successful. Let's see, there was a last question.
On getting to the female century.
That's a great question. I guess one metric of success is when we don't have talks on the imposter syndrome anymore. I think when we see women leaders represented in industry and academia, in the public sector, that are comparable to the populations that they govern or they're responsible for, I think is when we'll see that. Look at the number of women in the workforce at universities, in the pipelines. There's such great talent that we're not taking advantage of. So literally, when there isn't a stigma, when there isn't a feeling that there is a decision to appoint someone or not appoint someone because they are a woman, I think we're a long way from that, but I think we're slowly making progress.
Okay, unfortunately, and it's really unfortunately, I have to draw this to a close because Martha has some other event to go to. I now have a word to describe what I'm going through, right? It's called imposter syndrome. And I'm glad, I'm really glad to put a word to it and to realize that I should listen to that voice telling me that I can do it. And it's been a long journey, but I think I'm getting to a point to say, I can do what I'm doing. So it's been such a pleasure to listen to you today. It was such great questions, and please everyone, join me in thanking Martha for spending the evening. Thank you. Thank you.